moment that English settlers arrived in America, there was an ideology alive within all of them, spanning from Massachusetts to Georgia. Spirit of survival, spirit of independence, spirit of opportunity, and a belief in not wanting to pay taxes. These were the principles of the American dream and the American Revolution from the very beginning. These beliefs created a movement that led from a few colonists who were angry but not being repaid for the French and Indian War, all the way to a full-scale war against England for complete independence. As all things do, this revolution started as a minuscule spark that would ignite a nation. In the 1700s, unrest in America was more than apparent. In protest of the new taxes on most commercial goods, such as tea, glass, honey, lead, oil, paper, etc., assaults on customs officers and tax collectors became almost daily occurrences. Once soldiers were called in, tension between colonists and British soldiers only exponentially grew, with every detachment of soldiers in Boston being ridiculed wherever they went. It's only a matter of time before something unwanted happened, and on March 5th, 1770, this dreaded event occurred. A large group of colonists had gathered outside a customs office to protest taxes imposed on commercial goods. The soldiers stationed at the office called for backup. Soon enough soldiers arrived on the scene with loaded muskets. After a few minutes of yelling and assault via snowballs, a soldier got hit in the head with a club, and as he fell, his musket misfired. Then, after a moment of anger and gunfire, 5 colonists lay dead on the ground.
We'll be talking about the Boston Massacre. The Boston Massacre was an event in which British troops fired upon a crowd of Bostonians on March 5, 1770. 5 colonists were killed in the gunfight by the British regulars. And the context behind the incident was that on the morning of March 5, 1770, a few Bostonians began to harass a British ensign stationed in Boston. Colonists were throwing snowballs at the regulars and used provoking language to try to annoy him. The snowballs escalated to rocks, and the ensign called in backup as the crowd grew. Right after the regular called for backup, the rocks turned to oyster shells. They continued to throw the hard objects at the British soldiers. The crowd, whilst escalating in violence, also used harsher terms that at one point basically asked the British to stop shooting them. After being harassed by the crowd too harshly, a British regular fell over and misfired his musket, which confused the remaining soldiers who instinctively aimed at the crowd. The full unit of soldiers proceeded to fire upon the American crowd, causing 5 people to be fatally injured and 11 musket balls injured 11 other men. This incident infuriated colonists, as in their eyes, British soldiers fired on innocent colonists. This convinced some colonists to rally with anti-British sentiments, and this incident showed some people how brutal and unfair the British crown was. This incident also created several pieces of propaganda used to create British hate. One of the most famous examples was the drawing of the Boston Massacre by Paul Revere.
Boston only got more volatile and infuriated after the Boston Massacre, with the taxes the colonists were protesting being mostly repealed except for the tax on tea. Colonists were now adamantly focused on being infuriated due to the remaining tax that had yet to be fully repealed. The Sons of Liberty, known for browbeating tax collectors and tar and feathering people, loyal to King George III, began plotting to get back at England for the tea tax imposed by the British Parliament. On December 16, 1773, they acted on their plan and sabotaged 3 British ships carrying tea from India.
In the 1760s, Britain was in deep debt because of the money that was borrowed from all the wars they had just fought. So the British Parliament imposed taxes on American colonies on everything. The Stamped Act of 1765 taxed colonists on every piece of printed paper. They went even further that the Townshend Act was passed that taxed essential things like paint, glass, and tea. The British thought this was fair because they're fighting in favor of the colonists. However, the colonists were furious because they were being taxed without any representation in the parliament. This infuriated the colonists, which made them hijack the ships and throw out $1 million worth of tea. During the Boston Tea Party, the Sons of Liberty dumped the chests of tea disguised as Native Americans. They went in the ships called Dartmouth, Beaver, and the Eleanor, containing 342 chests of tea. The money that they caused in damage is worth about $1 million in today's money. Even if the tea party seemed quick, it actually took 3 hours for all the tea to be dumped into the harbor. No one was injured and nothing except the tea and the padlock was stolen or damaged. Most of the people during the Boston Tea Party remained unknown, except Francis Achille, who was the person that was being blamed for the whole tea party. The final results of the Boston Tea Party. In the wake of the Boston Tea Party, the British passed the Intolerable Acts. This act was to punish the Massachusetts colony for their acts in the Boston Tea Party. The act that was passed closed the Boston Harbor. It moved judicial authorities to England if England soldiers committed a capital crime, made colonists welcome British troops into their home, and extended freedom of worship to only Catholics. The British hoped that would break New England's fighting spirit. However, other colonies saw this as a punishment and went to aid Massachusetts due to their crippled economy.
For a long time, the unrest about the British rule of Boston was confined only to Boston, due to only Bostonians having to deal with British soldiers and higher taxes on shipping. However, this occupation rule by the British didn't really affect the greater Massachusetts area until the Intolerable Acts were passed. These new acts affected everyone from farmers to lawyers across the Massachusetts colony by decreeing several things which were against the colonists. Many colonists who before had no vested interest in the political discourse between Boston and Britain began to choose sides. One man named Paul Revere sided with the Patriots and would go down in history as an influential founding father of our country.
We will be talking about Paul Revere's legendary and quite old house, where the less famous founding father lived for most of his life. He is most known for informing people in and around Concord about the approaching British, which planned to take the weapons they secretly cached in a barn house in Concord. They cached the weapons there to try to prevent them from being stolen so that they could start an armed revolt with the stored weapons. He went all the way from Boston to Concord with his horse yelling out, "The regulars are coming, the regulars are coming," in a quite British accent. The two others assisted him on his journey. Their names were William Dawes and Dr. Samuel Prescott. In the Revolutionary War, Paul Revere worked as a silversmith and a craftsman, and was even on the Penobscot expedition in Maine, intended to advance on the British in Canada. Since he was a craftsman and silversmith, he made and crafted weapons for the United States. He sent his creations off to battle. He drew the famous drawing of the Boston Massacre, which was American propaganda until the end of the Revolutionary War. After the war, Paul Revere managed to get a job in building one of the first ships of the U.S. Navy, the USS Constitution, which is near his house in Charleston. His life ended in 1818, however, his house still stands today. And I have no actual clue how it's still standing, as it is hundreds of years old.
William Dawes' midnight ride with Paul Revere successfully conveyed the news of the British Army advancing to Concord. On April 19, 1775, militiamen were deployed in the neighboring towns and cities to defend their weapons and homes from the British opposition. Around 70 militiamen met the 700 British regulars on the day of the battle. They stood against each other for several minutes before a shot rang out. And from that single shot, a nation was born.
On the famous battlefield of the influential Battle of Lexington and Concord, Patriot and British forces first clashed, marking the start of the Revolutionary War that would eventually free America from British rule. On April 19, 1775, 700 British troops from Boston, led by Colonel Francis Smith, advanced to Concord to prevent American patriots from hiding weapons that were rumored to be used in their future plan to attack the British. These weapon supplies were supposed to be stored away because of the commands of Sir Thomas Gage, the royal governor of Massachusetts, who ordered the population of Massachusetts, including Lexington and Concord, to keep their guns and munitions in Faneuil Hall. This order was implemented to prevent armed revolts from colonists like the ones the colonists planned. The reason for their plot was due to their growing hate of the British forces that were occupying their colony. Because Thomas Gage is a royal governor, he has authority over British troops in Massachusetts as he is trusted by the king and he was elected by him. When British troops started advancing on Concord, militiamen from Lexington, led by John Parker, intercepted them to try and prevent their weapons from being taken. The reason they knew the British were coming was a result of Paul Revere's and William Dawes' famous ride that informed people living in Concord and the towns around it that the British were coming to apprehend the weapons from the Patriots. The militias of Lexington, Concord, and the surrounding towns assembled 70 men to meet the soldiers sent by the British at 5 a.m. on Lexington Green. They initially didn't clash until someone fired their rifle, which marked the start of the battles as people started engaging each other in musket-oriented combat. People still debate who fired the first gunshot. A few people think it was the British, some people think it was the colonists, and other people think it was a random guy hunting a turkey nearby in the woods. Wherever the person who fired that shot was, that shot marked the beginning of a revolution and started the great American conflict that earned the colonies their independence. After being overwhelmed by the British, John Parker ordered his army to disperse and retreat to Concord after facing the superior British forces. The British, led by John Pitcairn and Francis Smith, advanced to Concord to apprehend the Patriots' weapons, as no one was stopping them. When the British reached Concord at 8 a.m., they split their forces to secure the North Bridge near the Concord River, which meant they had a smaller initial force of 500 regulars. When they were met by a force of 400 American militiamen, they were compelled to retreat after being overrun by the Americans. This overwhelming force implemented by the colonists sent the British troops back to Boston and signaled an ultimate win for the Patriots. On their way back to Boston, the British received fire from hidden Patriots in the buildings and behind the trees. This fire from Patriots caused them to suffer greater casualties. In fact, the issue of the Patriots firing at the British was such a problem, the British had to get reinforcements to be safely escorted back to Boston, so less casualties would be suffered. Overall, there were 3,960 Americans that participated in the end, as their forces had grown to keep assaulting the British troops after the retreat. As well, there were 1,500 British soldiers who participated in fighting and retrieval of the other British troops. Out of the American soldiers, 93 Americans died, and out of the British soldiers, 300 died. This sounded a resounding win for the Americans, and it gave them the confidence to commit major blows to the British Army.
The Battle of Lexington and Concord showed the American people, the British, and the rest of the world this anti-British sentiment was not a few angry Bostonians that were getting taxed. This was a full-on revolution. And this supposedly small conflict was the war deciding America's freedom. The militias of multiple northeastern states began fully mobilizing into a newly formed Continental Army. With their new forces, Massachusetts set up defensive positions in Charleston and had the British trapped in Boston. This battle in Boston was about to determine the strength of this newly formed Continental Army.
The Bunker Hill and Breed's Hill marked one of the first major battles of the Revolutionary War. This conflict was sparked because of Sir Thomas Gage, who was demanded to use his position of royal governor to lead an offensive to get rid of the rebellion of Americans that had risen up in Charlestown. He planned to attack the north and south heights of Boston to try to repel these rebels with his generals William Howe, Henry Clinton, and John Burgoyne. British soldiers were appalled at the amount of American soldiers that were going to attend the future battle. This worried them about the potential of success. William Howe, John Pitcairn, and Henry Clinton attended the British Army in Boston to lead this charge. The Patriots fortified Breed's Hill in Boston to protect their area and to be on the defensive, which will allow them a greater chance of victory. On June 15th and 16th, forces were ready to engage the Patriots on Breed's Hill.
On June 17th, around 2,200 British soldiers under command of Major General William Howe arrived on the Charlestown Peninsula, then marched up to Breed's Hill to push out the Americans occupying the hill. As the British marched up the hill, Prescott, an American colonel, told his soldiers to not fire in order to conserve their limited supply of ammunition. He reportedly told his men to not fire till they saw the whites of their eyes. When the British were within several dozen yards, the Americans let loose a volley of musket fire, making the British retreat as they suffered great casualties. After fixing their lines, the British attacked, reaping the same results as the previous attempt, making them retreat again. As the Americans were low on ammunition, the British went up the hill for the third time. The British got close enough to the colonists where both sides engaged in a hand-to-hand combat before the outnumbered colonists were forced to retreat. At the end of this battle, the casualties of the battle were high. Patriots' gunfire was able to limit the British army from using 1,000 troops. With more than 200 killed and more than 800 wounded. More than 100 Americans were killed and more than 300 Americans were wounded.
The American Revolution was born, and from there George Washington would lead the Continental Army to victory, bringing in the help of France along the way after Saratoga. And with the French now aiding the Americans, they would trap General Cornwallis in Yorktown, Virginia, with the aid of the French fleet. Later, the Treaty of Paris would formally end the war and establish America as a free and independent nation. Thank you for following us as we walk through the first chapter of the American Revolution.
We hope you enjoyed learning about the primary causes of the American Revolution, as these are what founded our country and its beliefs.
We hope you will be here for the next time we do something like this.
This has been a Hallmark documentary made by the New England History Hallmark Incorporated.
I have been Andrew Burns, your narrator and chief historian.
I have been Will Agnes, chief editor, chief researcher, reporter, and historian.
I have been Cristiano Santos Oliveira, reporter and historian.
I have been Peyton Lutch, chief comedian, influential reporter, and historian.
Thank
you for your time, and we hope you have learned something today.
Sounds like
That last section was kind of bad, but we're just going to...
Oliveira, reporter and historian.
I have been Peyton Lutch, chief comedian, influential reporter.
As we walk through the first chapter of the American Revolution.
We hope you enjoyed reading.
Oh, dang it.
Thanks, Will.
Wait.